Well, thank you very much for having us here to discuss with you, the Belt and Road initiative with you today. As you know, China held a very successful Belt and Road Forum for international cooperation in May. It gathered around 29 heads of states in Beijing and over 1,500 delegates from over 130 countries. So it's a very successful event, and at the opening session, His Excellency President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech called "Work Together to Build the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Maritime Silk Road." I think which greatly inspired the audience and will resonate with people around the world for the years to come. I think in his speech, President Xi actually summarized what we have achieved in the last 4 years since this initiative was first put forward. I think it can be better, characterized as the remarkable progress made in the improved connectivity in 5 major areas. That is the policy coordination, infrastructure facilities, trade, finance, and people-to-people ties. I think the President Xi called on us to further advance the Belt and Road initiative by working together with the countries around the world, to build 5 roads, i.e. the road of peace, the road of openness, the road of innovation, and the road of prosperity, and the road of civilization. So all leading to the establishing a community with a shared destiny. The common theme of the Belt and Road initiative is the wide consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits. So it is an open, inclusive, and transparent initiative. So I think so. That's why we, as a team, why we come to New York for this trip to share with you, our perspective or our thoughts on this initiative, and also we would like to hear what you think or what's your perspective and observations on this initiative. In particular, we can have common understanding on how we can work together in the future to have a better execution of this initiative. So I think that's the basic background, for the Belt and Road Forum and the trip of our team. So I think I will ask my colleague to have a very short introduction of their observations on the initiative. Then we will be very happy to take questions. Thank you. Maybe Professor Zhao from Peking University.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here in New York. I want to thank the National Committee, also the New School, for hosting us. I actually started working on the project as a team of Beta that was at the request of Deputy Prime Minister Liang Huijiang when he was running the Chinese economy, right in the wake of the Wall Street financial crisis. This was called the China 2025 project. The Belt and Road idea emerged out of such studies. We basically observed that you have aging, you have protectionist sentiments. This is way before Brexit. In Japan, in the United States, in Western Europe. So the old model of the Chinese growth, which has 4 steps, meaning you import raw materials, you focus on manufacturing and employment at home, you export your products and earn hard currency, the whole cycle starts again. that model was running into problem. And we see this in the ever declining amount of sales in the Canton Fair, the Guangzhou Trade Fair, no matter how much we subsidize, frankly speaking. So the Belt and Road is not about getting rid of spare capacity in steel or selling one more ton of steel if we cannot sell to the United States, to other parts of the world. So it's about growth. It's about spurring demand from somewhere. Frankly speaking, it's more like China playing the role of the United States when the US went to China back in the early 1970s. We were a country that could only afford bicycles. But after several years of trying, we can now afford to buy new airplanes. And of course, we're also trying to build new planes. So we hope to turn some economies into little Chinas, which means that the prospect of the Belt and Road relies as much on China as it relies on the other parties. Those that are willing to participate, that share the vision, but at the same time, you would need 3 legs to keep a stool even. The third leg would have to be the United States, Europe, and elsewhere. That's why, if you look at official sources from the Chinese government, the so-called Belt and Road does not have a real map. It's an invitation on the table, frankly speaking. It's not a plan, it's an initiative. And I will say one more thing, then I stop. You're looking at me.
No. I'm listening.
In terms of the greatest obstacle, as I see it as an academic who's being involved in some of this conceptualization, is that the Chinese idea probably risks being a little bit too much, leaning too heavily on projects rather than rules. There will be failures. There will be disputes. So what are the rules that apply? Is it the New York Convention, on business arbitration, or is it the Washington Convention on investor-state disputes? China needs to make it clear this is not a bailout. We have no responsibility to bail out anybody. We don't want regime change, nor do we want a regime liability anywhere around the world. And we made some mistakes in the past. The very last word I would say in response to what Mark said about the Indian concerns. Actually, if you look at AIIB, that's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, it's barely 2 years old. Now we have a record of what kind of projects AIIB actually financed in the past. Very tiny amount of money in comparison with ADB or World Bank. 30%, 30, not 13, 30. 30% of AIIB funds thus far went to one country and one country only, and that country is India. Thank you.
Maybe Professor Wang, brief introduction, yeah.
My name is Wang Wen. I'm from Chongyang Institute for Financial Study, based on the Liming University of China. I'm very honored to New York again, because as we all know that in the world, so many people admire New York. They consider New York as a capital of the world. Why? Because New York always had a strong and huge capacity to find an opportunity for earning money, because you have the Wall Street, right? And especially in the past 40 years, you find the China opportunity. Most of the investors who find an opportunity of the China reform and opening up period, they earn money, right? In the past 40 years, since 1978 of the Deng Xiaoping period. And then, how do New York can keep the sustainable medical for earning money always? It depends on So in my opinion, the next wave of opportunity is the One Belt One Road initiative, to be honest, frankly speaking. Because we look at all the reality of the One Belt One Road region, China really earned a lot of money. But the problem is we still face a lot of challenges. So I think that every day I read the newspaper, U.S. newspaper, especially the Wall Street Journal or Washington Post or New York Times. I think they have two very interesting phenomena. That is, most of the reporting of the U.S. newspaper or public opinion, they overestimate China's strategic ambition of the world order. So I totally agree with Professor Zhang that China has no such a deep or sophisticated strategy ambition to want to or change the world order instead of the U.S. I think that's an overestimate. And on the other hand, that is U.S. Public opinion, especially in those media, underestimate the cooperation potential between China and U.S. in One Belt One Road region. So I think that in the future, China has enough money, enough technology, enough maybe labor, but U.S. has security protection capacity. U.S. has enough management experience. So I think it's a totally complementary potential cooperation potential. So I think that's our new opportunity. New York should find the new wave opportunity for our two countries in the future. So this is my very brief presentation for you. So I'd like to answer any question. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Zhai from Peking University.
Thank you. I'm Jackson from PQ. First, I would like to say some thanks to National Committee because I'm a member of YLF. It's sponsored by National Committee, the Youth Leader Forum. I am a member of that, so I learned a lot from our young elites. So the second, I would like to share some observations about OBOR. So according to my own observation, so I think China would like to expect a more constructive role of U.S. for OBOR. So some people believe American have nothing to do with OBOR, but it's not true. So for American, I think there are some fields can be cooperated with China. For example, the first, some strategic coordination, because OBOR may be the most important initiative or strategy of China. So what's the response to America? President Xi just talked with Trump in April. So Xi called on cooperation on the framework of OBOR. And then in middle May, a working group attended BRF, Belt and Road Forum. So maybe it's a very low level coordination. So maybe today there is a strategic or security dialogue between China and the US. So I think the OBOR issue should be in such kind of level. The second cooperation field may be area studies. So American have very strong area studies. But China needs more comprehensive area studies because of OBOR related to so many countries and so many regions. So China can learn, but it may be different from American area studies. So third fields maybe China can learn some lessons and experience from American history towards these regions. The fourth, maybe China can seek some business opportunity of American partners. plus in South Asia, Southeast Asia, in OBR countries, there are a lot of business opportunities. It's not China's. It's not only China's opportunity. All the opportunities also belong to other countries like U.S. So we are facing such big market. Why not cooperate to develop new opportunities? So I will stop here.
Thanks very much to everyone, both for the substance and for the concise manner in which all that substance was delivered. I wanted to just take a quick moment here as chair's prerogative to add something to what Dr. Jai just said, which is that India-China Institute, in line with your thinking about area studies being an important part, great to hear, which we haven't heard much endorsement of area studies in the United States, certainly, and at U.S. universities. But the India-China Institute, I was saying, last month we had a program in which there were 9 scholars from Chinese universities, Indian universities, and a few from American universities who were engaged in doing area studies research on the other country from which they were coming, the Chinese scholars looking at India and vice versa. And certainly 3, arguably 4 out of the 9 were doing research on Obor in different ways, one on urbanization, one on religious implications and migration. So I think I just wanted to mention that program of ours and to say that I really appreciate the endorsement of area studies. But one thing, this is to all the panelists, including Director General Liang, I think in one way or the other, you all 4 mentioned how the U.S. and the EU have an important role to play, the third leg of the stool. And could you elaborate a little bit more on that? By which do you mean the government? Do you mean corporations? And in particular, I guess my specific question would be, to what extent are European, American construction and infrastructure companies, I'm thinking of General Electric among others, to what extent will they be eligible to provide equipment ranging from earth-moving infrastructure to high-tech turbines in dams and this sort of thing? Or will this be, as it has been reported sometimes in the not always accurate press in the West and elsewhere, that this will be almost exclusively for Chinese companies, Chinese state-owned enterprises in particular?
Okay, maybe I can have a quick response to Professor Fraser's question. I think for those infrastructure and manufacturing projects that CDB or other Chinese banks would like to finance, with regard to the procurement policy, I think we do not have a explicit requirement that it must be done by Chinese companies. It's actually an open process, or it's an open but of course the result is that a lot of these projects actually will be supplied by Chinese companies. Is that it's actually because we know that the equipment of GE or other American companies, of course, are very high, better quality, but of course the cost is higher. It's more expensive. So it's a kind of the cost and the benefits analysis. So it's the final. I think the decision will be made by the project sponsor or So we at the bank. We generally we always require that those projects can be completed on a timely fashion, and of course in a more economic, affordable way. So that will actually make our loan safer. So thank you.
Well, it's hard to answer this question because WTO and other multilateral rules talk about government procurement. And now comes a situation, as is the case in Europe, where the EU demands that if any Chinese investment goes into any EU member state, then other member states, even if they are not investing, should have equal rights in the procurement process. And this invariably gets a little challenging because you have standards, you have different legislative process, and should a non-investor, just because it's part of a European Union, be having veto power over an infrastructure project in another member state? I'm more specifically speaking about the railway project from Serbia to connecting Serbia and Hungary, and which is basically now left in limbo because Brussels demands procurement, so-called transparency. So that's what I was referring to in terms of rules. I would say for US, EU, again, one of the things we want to invite you folks to observe, and if not accept, is that this is not going to be a Chinese government aid-based project. This is, as we said, this has to be it's an invitation. The participating entities, I'm not saying just countries, have to step up with their share of the contribution. And certainly we learned a lot of lessons from the old policy, old practice of doing what's called turnkey projects, meaning the finance, the EPC, engineering, procurement, construction, and the consequences are all done by the Chinese. The turnkey projects are usually an invitation to problems, including corruption and including debt-ridden projects. So we want to get away from that, and that's why we created the AIIB. That's supposed to, try to internationalize it. That's why his bank and others continue to work with, for example, the MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agencies. The finance is part of how US and EU entities can participate, joint financing, and we need, frankly speaking, a lot of these counseling, a lot of these advisory work, because many of these economies we want to see growth in Africa, let's say even in Southeast Asia. They have a longer history of relating to their former colonies than to China. And their elites, their educational institutions, their basic standard legal frameworks are still from the old days, before they gained independence. And that's why China signed cooperation framework agreements with France to work together in Franco-Africa. And we did likewise in Korea. This is meant, with Korea, this is meant to work together both in Central Asia and also in Southeast Asia. With Britain, certainly, we have a longer history with Britain working in Africa, and hopefully with the United States as well. The United States everywhere around the world. And the last point is about US corporations. And one of the things I would think GE could be contemplating doing is to see what Airbus is doing. Now Airbus assembles some of its airplanes in Tianjin, and as you know, airplane usage, maintenance, and what else requires a good deal of training. So Airbus and Chinese entities work very closely together to train Africans and others so that they could start buying the Airbus assembled in China and to exporting to those parts of the world. You can all, the last word I want to say, and this is not trying to be provocative just for the sake of it. Yeah, you can be on a standby, you can complain, you can, keep saying this is suspicious. That's fine, no doubt about it. But this is an open-ended invitation. I do believe the Americans are not short of ingenuity. You know, have good, solid confidence in yourself, step up and work with us. Why not?
It's just one example, you know.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Just work with us. Yeah.
Just one example as you know, for our bank's financing. I just you know, to tell you an example is we financed, actually we led a syndication to finance the Hinkley Point nuclear power station in the UK, which actually the equipment is actually supplied by the French company. So that's why, you know, we are not you know, it's based on actually as I said, costs and benefits. So it's definitely there were opportunities for the GE and Caterpillar, you know, all sorts of American companies, maybe.
I think I'd like to add my personal feeling about infrastructure, because today this is my fourth stop. Every time I was in the way, I was in the car, I feel very sick, stomach sick, because of the load. You know, the car always jump by running, and always I feel very sick, stomach sick. You know, I always think why. Well, this is my many times in New York. But every time, why the load is so bad? Why you upgrade your load in infrastructure? Honestly, frankly speaking, I just give you the very frank suggestion. You should feel very comfortable when you drive or when you're in the car, right? But the load, that's why in this point, I don't want to President Trump, but in this point, in the infrastructure point, I supported President Trump. Because President Trump said we should upgrade the infrastructure of the United States, right? Especially New York. New York is the capital of the world. So back to the cooperation in the infrastructure, I think that maybe U.S. could welcome those China infrastructure company to help New York City to upgrade the infrastructure. Yeah. And second thing that I think very good opportunity. When I was in D.C., all the think tank scholars, all the think tank colleagues, they criticize President Obama. They criticize Obama didn't participate the AIB. So I think in the future, maybe yesterday, President Jinping, who is the governor of the AIB, he talked about again that AIB always open the door for the U.S. and the U.S. can join the AIB, and we can cooperate in the infrastructure here, and we cooperate to invest in infrastructure in the third country, especially for those emerging countries and urban. So, but on the other hand, that we have the very successful example in Ethiopia, and in Ethiopia we have China have a industrial zone, industrial park, and in the industrial park, and we have the U.S. investment, and we have very good cooperation in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. So I think this is a very good example, and maybe in the future we expect, we look forward to having more and more successful example of our two country cooperation. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for those great remarks and responses. We now have your questions. Just quickly, if you can introduce yourself, just state your name and your organization, and then we will. Do we have a roving mic? Okay. And thanks in advance for keeping your questions as short as possible, following the lead of our panelists tonight. Yes, Bob, here in the front, please, first. Yeah.
Hi, Bob Peterzak of the National Committee and also Sidley Austin. Thank you, gentlemen, for your very informative remarks. I like particularly your focus on the U.S. involvement, but you focus primarily on what business involvement might be. But obviously, business in the U.S. can't get involved if the U.S. is blocking it. So there's going to have to be some governmental role in order for the U.S. private entities and financiers to have a role in China. putting aside the question of what you think the U.S. might actually be willing to do, what would you see as the ideal role for the American government in working on One Belt, One Road?
Yeah, I think the U.S. government can act a very positive role in the One Belt, One Road future process. Now, the U.S. government has very huge and strong soft power, not only hard power, also soft power. And even now, a lot of countries still trust American government and follow up the American government policy. So I think, yes, I admit that in the process of One Belt, One Road in the past 4 years, we met a lot of challenge in the policy communication. And a few countries, for example, India, you mentioned, India always suspect China's ambition, strategic ambition, and India think that maybe China should be intervening the critical in the South Asia. So if China, America can cooperate in the strategy, so I think that will be solve the security dilemma in South Asia. So I think India needs the infrastructure. India needs a lot of investment. I think in my opinion, the U.S. government's role in the One Belt, One Road is very extremely important. So, but we appreciate the President Trump's a little bit change, because in the last month in the One Belt, One Road forum, President Trump sent a level official much better than India, because India government didn't send any.
I don't represent the Indian government. Just to make that clear. I keep being
Okay,
looked at
maybe
as
Dr.
Mr.
Professor
India.
Zhao?
Thanks. Other
Aye.
response?
Read next question. I didn't hear.
Okay, okay, oh, okay. Professor Zhao? No, no.
Next question.
So if the U.S. government is willing to involve to OBR, it's good. But it's not unwilling, it's also good. So you can find some cases from macro level. For example, some consultant companies, some think tanks are already involved to OBR. So I think the wise men are always from business circle. So if the businessmen are interested in OBR, I think the government should be. So it's my very short response.
I just ask a follow-up. What specifically do you think the government, U.S. government, could do? I know cooperation is wonderful, but what can it do that you think would be helpful for OBOR?
So one important thing is strategic coordination, because according to my observation, most strategists of America believe OBOR is a grand strategy of China against the U.S. So the coordination between the government and the government is crucial.
Very brief. I think that strategic trust is very, very important. And so many public opinion, even in think tank circles, they suspect that One Belt, One Road changed the world order U.S. established since the Second World War. So they suspect that maybe One Belt, One Road can destroy the international liberal order. I think this is not true. So I think that we can push the strategy.
Okay, yes, thank you. In the back. Malcolm.
William Janice, Florida Law School. Question, in terms of the magnitude of the money that will flow into some of the smallest countries along the One Belt, One Road, do you see the potential for distortions in the economies in terms of, say, asset bubbles and exacerbation of corruption, and what safeguards is China contemplating in terms of addressing that, in terms of rule of law, contract, arbitration, things of that nature? Thank you.
Okay, maybe I will have a quick response. Maybe my colleague have a. As I, yes, as I said, the need for infrastructure in the Belt and Road countries is huge, but it's on the paper. When we execute or implement this initiative, we actually on the business level, at the banks level, we will do it on a step by step. And very important point will be in our mind is that we want to make sure that the project we are going to finance is really needed. It's not wanted. It's needed in this particular country, and should be compatible with his stage of development. So we will not do the project for the sake of just of this project. What we at the development bank will do, we want to make sure that the project this country would like CDB to finance is consistent with his own strategy or his own strategic plan. And so, and also we will have to make sure that this project will be financially and economically sustainable in the long run. So in that case, I think and also because the money for those projects is huge, we are unable actually to do all the financing. And also we will, in the process, actually we want to cooperate with other banks we call it the crowd-in, the private money. Of course, we would like to do the role of the catalyst to start this process, but we will crowd in other money so to make sure that everybody will be happy. So we will not, I think, distort or contribute to the bubble. I think it's all based on the actual need. That's my.
Mark, can I just do a two-finger intervention?
Yes, follow up.
Because when you said that you think that many Americans are suspicious of OBOR because they think it's trying to overturn the world order rules that the U.S. and Britain and Europe and other countries have put in place since World War I or II. I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think because when we think of the world order rules, we're thinking about certain conventions and certain treaties and people playing by certain rules. And there is suspicion among people in many countries that China, as it grows larger and has a stronger economy and a larger army and is growing in so many, its economy is so extraordinary, that China has the ability and the power, and some people think the will to do that. But that doesn't relate, I don't think, to OBOR. I think people are more suspicious of OBOR because they see it as competition, which is different than trying to change the world order. So they see it as competition, which they may or may not be able to compete with. But it also relates to what you just said, Mr. Liang, and I was very happy to hear you say that as someone who represents the bank, you have very strong feelings that you will not just fund something just to fund it because it's there. Because frankly, last night in the program that we heard, it had to do with OBOR and its effects on higher education and what that means for the global education system. And the speaker gave us some examples of things that are part of OBOR. And one or two of them were, for instance, a school in Malaysia, which is now an OBOR school.
Mm-hmm.
So, an outsider looks at that and says, well, what do you mean it's an OBOR school? What does that have to do with this One Belt, One Road strategy in which you're trying to, so it seems to a lot of outsiders that because, China is very good about coming up with an idea, planning it, and then getting everybody behind it. So now every article you read in China Daily or People's Daily or academic journals or social media journals having to do with women's makeup, somehow there's a sentence in it about obor. So your government gets the people of China powerfully behind an idea, and it suddenly becomes a given factor. Just the idea of it, even if you don't yet have concrete steps that are filling it out. So I think there's more the concern of why people don't trust it is this yet another Chinese idea that because the government says it's so and all the media says it's so and therefore it wants to be so, even if it includes things like this Malaysian school, which, you know, Malaysia might have had a school that China was going to cooperate with, whether you had OBOR or not. So everything now is going to become part of OBOR, even when it may have nothing to do with OBOR.
Did you want to reply to
Yeah,
that?
I want to say something about that. Actually, we do have a sort of all-of-government approach to this Belt and Road idea. If I, as an academic, see what this whole idea has brought real change, as I experienced in China, is that it's for the first time ever, actually. It increases the interfertilization of ideas among government, industries, academics. My major is the international studies. I was called to join discussions by the Minister of Transportation, people who were working on maritime transport, and asked why. They said they wanted to, it's time to understand international politics, international law. So I would think if there is going to be an intangible but powerful impact, this whole thing is going to help idea upgrade the kind of collective intellectual capacity of the Chinese entities, first and foremost. But second is that let me emphasize again and again, if there's one idea that's behind this, we learn from our own practices. It's easier for me as an academic person to say this rather than for those practitioners, is that we really don't want to make the same old mistakes of, being accused of exacerbating another country's corruption or having another project like in Sri Lanka where it fails very miserably. And if you look at, I think it was within the past week, the Supreme Court of China has issued 2 batches of rulings, cases, saying these are the exemplary cases they would rule on these kind of business disputes involving what is now packaged to be Belt and Road Initiative. In other words, we want to discipline our own companies as well. They have to have some sort of rule of the law. And that's whereby we are sincere, frankly speaking, when we talk about the American role or the post-war order, whereby principles that are written in the Washington Convention on Investor-State Dispute, New York Convention on Business Arbitration get applied. We need to update the bilateral treaties we have with any country that's willing. Last but not least, the biggest the most powerful source of failure in this Belt and Road Initiative, as I see it, actually comes from a government that comes to China with all these niceties of supporting China, but wanting cash, nothing but cash. And they forget to use the cash to spur local capacity. I understand that this is an open session, but let me say it. For instance, this is not going to be quoted in the media, okay? If you look at Indonesia, you look at Thailand, when they talk to us about the rail projects, the one thing that's so critically missing in their demands on China is to help them to have, let's say, a railway science college, to train their engineers so that they start manufacturing. But instead, you hear, this is global competition. The Japanese have lower interest rates. The Americans have better reputation. So China, you figure it out. Do you give us even lower interest rates? Or else? The thing that's sorrowfully missing is what we can help do together. If there's one thing, it may sound a little bit arrogant, but it's not so baseless. If there is one thing these so-called other less developed countries can learn from China, is what? You don't just take the cash. You demand some transfer of knowledge. You demand some transfer of capacity so that you grow up in doing the things by yourself. Even with the train, you can begin by making the seats. Rather than saying, hey, China, you want the One Belt, One Road to shine, right? You do everything, and I'm here to... No, we don't do that. We don't want to do that anymore. And we do want you to be part of this. As I said in another occasion, even when your criticism, it's free service to us, it's friendly advice.
Okay, we have 10 minutes and
Sorry.
I have 9 questions. So we're gonna do this in we're gonna do this
Okay.
2 by 2, so
Okay, I
you
was
first
just very
and then-
short, questions. You talking about too much about the very observant, but I still want to know, is that a negative comments for your this country, over? I always am thinking, is that really and the needs for these countries around the over area? Okay, so that's what I still want. Thank you.
okay, and I believe you have the mic still in the back there? Yes.
Yes, hi, Bruce Rosen. Twofold questions. The principle of trust was raised, and I'm wondering how you look at this potential partners in Western Asia, otherwise known as the Middle East. A number of them are very hostile to each other, to put it politely, whether or not they're in an actual legal state of war. How do you see this as a way of changing that dynamic? And going to the US specifically, our Midwest and Northeast is known as the Rust Belt, and everybody believes the rust came from China. But one of the interesting things that's happened over there, as there's been disappearance of manufacturing jobs and shrinkage of population, is the role of the universities has become more pronounced. So we're left with some major research centers, like Pittsburgh, which used to be our steel city, and is now a medical and high-tech research center. So I'm wondering how you can be diplomatic and help to turn that around, to make it more palatable to Americans.
Thanks for those questions. Any quick responses from the panel?
Hear more questions.
Hear more questions. Okay, great. So we got Michael and then Margot in the next batch.
Hi there, thank you very much. My name is Michael, I'm a PhD student here at the New School. I just wanted to ask a quick question about coal. I know that the World Bank in 2013 adopted rules that would make investments in coal-fired power plants rare, and an acknowledgement of the damages that climate change will wreak on the world. So I'm just wondering if there are any policies like that we might expect to see from the Chinese Development Bank. Thank you.
I'm Margot Landman from the National Committee, and I have a labor question. If there are going to be all these projects in many countries around the world, will they be built by Chinese workers or local workers or some combination of the two?
Okay.
Yeah, I know that some of the export of coal-fired power plants has been brought up in the business coverage of OBOR. So that's I think what Michael's question's also getting at. So any responses on those two?
Yeah, okay, I'll try to answer as much as I can. Actually, we are having declining population. To send Chinese workers overseas is getting more and more difficult. And countries like Burma have localization rates. Many of our projects are quite localized, mainly because, so that's not a real question. And with the World Bank rule on coal-fired power plants and in relation to climate change, look, you are really asking poor people in a poor country without electricity to choose between your version of being responsible for the future of the earth and continuation of darkness. Let's face it. Yes, there is climate change. I'm not here to do battle. Somewhere there has to be a middle way. Is it absolutely no coal? Or is it, let's say, we deploy the latest coal technology possible for some, so that these people can benefit from some electricity. So I don't have time. I can go on and on because partly because I work on energy projects. There are problems. We are not, when you, in relation to your question about Western Asia, look, the United States actually had a Silk Road project under Secretary Clinton. We'll look at that as well. We cannot hope to resolve all the questions, and like I said, we are not committed to regime change in any country, nor are we committed to bail out anybody, and we don't want to be a liability, any country to be allowed become. So that pretty much, the Pittsburgh question, I understand Professor David Otter from MIT and his team did a study linking America's misery to China, right, relating that to the word WTO, although China's membership in WTO. His message is much more complicated, but it gets simplified. 以前有采购，现在没有了吧？是吗？就是这个来美国采购团，现在好像还没有。So we are not quite sure what to do about the Rust Belt situation. I do believe the National Committee is playing a role, and when local governors from both China and the United States are relating to each other, let's find a sensible way of relating to each other. So, but one thing we should not forget over there in China is that Americans are not short of self-pride either. So this needs to be we need to handle this very, very delicately.
Yes, Dr. Wang.
Very briefly. I think about the global governance or about how to involve the international interaction or international governance. I think China now is still the student, new student. We always learn from the U.S. Not only for the U.S. successful experience, but also U.S. giving lessons. So One Belt, One Road, I think that some part of One Belt, One Road process we did not very good. For example, One Belt, One Road is a very good story. It's a very, very good story. But China government or Chinese, we didn't tell the story very well. Because we are students, we don't know how to tell the story to the international society. But on the other hand, that is, we learn a lot of lessons from US. For example, the Western Asia, some people ask. Because US, in the past, US often forced those Western Asia countries to change the region, as Professor said. But now, China didn't. We just want to do the business with you. We don't want to add any political elements or political requests to you. No problem, we respect your political regions. And also, I think, back to the question about competition, I think that competition is very good issues, very good things. Because competition can produce the innovation. So I think that don't worry about the competition in the international project or in everything. I think we have, in some area, we have a very good or positive competition. Yeah, right?
Okay.
Especially for the geopolitical.
Thanks for those great responses. And let me hope in the next 2 minutes we can get out 4 brief questions and then give the panel one final word. So thank you.
Yeah, my question is for Mr. Lin. And you mentioned that you financed the project in UK and the equipment is produced by France. And in your 300 billion portfolio, do you have how much is invested in US? Did you finance any project in US?
Okay.
And Martin?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Okay, Martin first. and
Okay.
then-
Very quickly for Mr. Zhang, what would you like to see progress in U.S.-Chinese cooperation on this, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, and then this gentleman here, and then Aaron.
Bill Cage is his name. I'm a
Bill.
freelance writer. 2 very quick questions. First one for Mr. Liang. Could you tell us where you see the opportunities for lending for the bank? Which countries, what types of projects, say in the next 2 years or so? And a second question, maybe for the panel in general. China's had a problem with foreign exchange outflows. How do you see that affecting the pace of development of the OBOR initiative?
Great, thanks for those. And final question from Aaron.
Aaron Legwa from NYU Law School. Following up on the comment about labor conditions and who's going to be doing the work, if it's true that most of the work is being done by local people in the local countries, I'm curious, will there be any sort of insistence or oversight of the standards used in those labor projects? So for instance, to make sure that Chinese companies abroad are not using child labor or conditions that maybe even are permissible under the laws of those localities, but are not consistent with international principles or even China's own standards for labor.
Great. Last set of 4 questions, and let me just invite each of the panelists to answer as many
because
or as few as they'd like.
because I was
had several.
First, to the with regard to the our lending to the U.S. To be frank, is quite small right now because I think because we mainly follow the company, so maybe right now not so many investment from China side in the U.S. But of course, I think it's a huge potential for us to do more. Yeah, so it's not so much of our lending to the U.S. On the questions, in the next few years, how CDB's credit would go. I think mainly we will still be the priority areas will still be in the Eurasia and South Asia and South Asia, so around the neighboring countries of China. I think that's still the priority areas. Of course, including the Africa as well. Sorry. With regard to the labor, I think when we finance the projects, I think most of these projects is a combination of local and, but of course, local and the Chinese. But I think the majority will be taken by the local labor. I think. But for some skill work, for the requirements, maybe there will be some Chinese workers be sent there, but we will also do the training, to the local to take on when they're there. So there will be there are quite many immigration or job requirements of the host country, so we have to comply with. So I think that's a quick response.
Quick answer to the question, what I expect in the ideal situation, U.S.-China to cooperate next 5 years. Frankly speaking, our 2 countries can both benefit from demonstrating that China and the United States can indeed work together. I see specifically 2 issue areas where we ought to be making real progress in the next 5 years. One is the bilateral investment treaty. We've had 34 rounds of formal negotiations dating back to 1982. If we keep talking about rule-based order, let's handle it among the first and second largest economies of the world. If we talk about rule of law, let's have some rules. You can always argue that China not to be trusted. We've argued for some 30 bloody years. It's about time to move on, or simply drop it. The second issue area, frankly speaking, is China and the United States must cooperate further on judicial cooperation. Earlier, you have questions about the foreign exchange outflows, right? A lot of this is some sheer criminality in the name of innovation. But at the end of 2008, they were never picked up again. The China and the United States stopped talking to each other about an extradition treaty. We are talking about real humans. So the huge legal loophole here for creative, innovative, different, let's say, sheer criminals to exploit this. So if these are actually, we were not short of trying, but to me, these two projects, the BIP and probably an extradition treaty, which we have experience working on, make some real progress on this, and both of our countries will have much higher standing around, the other countries we want to relate to.
Very brief. I think that the localization is a very proud thing for most of the China companies overseas. Yeah, that's first. Second is, in the next 5 years, because China government have every 5 years they have a 5-year plan, right? And for the One Belt One Road, they have a very extreme excellent plan. That, for example, in the 5 years, China will import over $8 trillion production from the world. And also, China will invest overseas over maybe $750 billion. So we'll be the maybe one biggest OFDI country. So I think it's a big opportunity for US. US should be the stakeholder of the One Belt One Road. Yeah. Thank you.
So, okay. So I try my best to answer all the questions with one answer. What's the nature of OBOR? So it's a biggest business created by China government in this century. So China draw a very big cake for the future. So it's a business of this century. So there are two logics. The first, the government logic. You can negotiate with the China government for your benefit. Their logic is the logic of a market. The market will adjust the OBOR. So just think it's a business. You can do it very well. Finish here.
And those are very good words to conclude on. Let's please give our panel a round.